Could you imagine how cool it would be if we had a keyboard with an Elgato Stream Deck actually built in? Oh yeah, Razer actually did that 10 years ago with the Razer Deathstalker Ultimate. What's up guys, I'm randomfrankp, and today we're gonna be revisiting this very cool and kind of forgotten keyboard that Razer released in 2012, which gave us 10 LCD screen buttons plus this little trackpad here, which also acted as a screen itself. So when this released in 2012, it came at a premium price tag at $250, which even by today's standards is a lot of money. Now imagine that 10 years ago when keyboards were nowhere near where they are now. So I went over to eBay and found a brand new unit for just 150 bucks. Picked it up because I figured it would make for a pretty cool video for you guys today. And I did this because I remember when Elgato released the Stream Deck in 2017, and then just a few months later, Elgato merged with Corsair, I figured, okay, it'll be no time before we get an actual keyboard with this technology built in. But here we are, still doesn't exist, and that's why I figured, why not revisit this really cool keyboard from 10 years ago. And believe it or not, when this was released, it was actually received pretty poorly and didn't get glowing reviews at all. So that's why we're gonna take a look at it. Find out why it's still cool and kind of why it failed. Now, the first thing that stuck out to me when I got it unboxed, opened up, was this is actually very lightweight and very thin. Their whole Deathstalker lineup back in the day followed this design language. This is also because these more low-profile chiclet keys were more popular back in the day. But obviously the big selling point to this was the new Switchblade technology, Razer called it, with those 10 LCD screens that were customizable and the 4-inch LCD screen below it, which was not only a full trackpad, but a screen. And also, if you want to get a good laugh, this was one of the first Chroma keyboards, and we'll touch on that in a minute. So, quick overview. The Deathstalker Ultimate is a full-size, full layout keyboard, 5 macro keys on the left side, features the grippiest built-in wrist rest I've ever seen in my life. Like, this material is bizarre. The second I got it out of the box, and you probably saw during the unboxing, it just immediately started collecting smudges and dust and anything in the air. This material is like glossy, but also super tacky at the same time. And regardless of how you try to clean it, you're only gonna make it worse. A microfiber cloth made it 10 times worse. This is the grippiest wrist rest in the world. And then the Deathstalker Ultimate also has, wait for it, rubber dome switches. Yeah, so back in 2012, mechanical keyboards obviously still existed and they were very popular. And that's actually one of the reasons why this keyboard wasn't received so well, was because for that premium $250 price tag, this still featured rubber dome switches. As you'd assume, they suck. It's like sticking your finger in a bowl of mashed potatoes. As a result, the RGB lighting as well is very, very dull because it gets diffused through the rubber dome layer and then that little light tube on the actual key switch. And again, at this time, it just would have made more sense for this price if we had mechanical switches. And I laughed before about the RGB lighting because this was before the rise of RGB, and this does not feature per key RGB. You can either set the keyboard to one static color or have the spectrum cycling effect, which just, does that very slow gradient rainbow across. But as you can see, very, very dull and barely serving a point at all. But Chroma doesn't serve a point anyway, except for looking nice, but here it really doesn't even do that. Now, before we move on to the highlight of the Deathstalker Ultimate with their Switchblade technology, I'm gonna do a sound test for you guys, because that's what we do with these keyboard reviews. So we're gonna do a sound test of these rubber dome switches in the Deathstalker Ultimate. Prepare yourselves. Yeah, things that make you go, ugh. I also even like tried it out for gaming a little bit, and you know, it's usable, but it's just not ideal. I think it's like 10 key rollover, which you know is still fine. I'm not doing more than 10 inputs at once. But again, it's just like, I don't want to use rubber dome switches, considering all the nice lubed linear switches and tactile switches out there that I'm in love with, all the custom keyboards I've used. Using this now, ugh. All right, now we're gonna dive into the Switchblade technology with these screens. I'm gonna do this real time over the shoulder so I can show you how it works and how it's all set up. Okay, so first up, the reason I have it at this awkward over the shoulder shot is because this is the best viewing angle in order to clearly see what's on these LCD screens. And they do it this way because they're sort of estimating this is the angle that you're gonna be looking at these screens from the average position of where you're seated at your desktop. Which means if you were to look at this straight on or overhead, these screens become very, very blurry and have this sort of ghosting effect. So they are meant to be seen from an angle, again, at the average position of where you'd be seated at your desktop. So the actual display is seated at an angle inside. It sounds weird, I know, and it's another reason why this was sort of knocked at release, was because of these weird viewing angles on the screen. So we're gonna run through them real quick. I'll show you guys how it's all set up. You have this 4-inch LCD screen and touchpad here, which as you can see, when you use it as like a mouse and a cursor, has a cool little trailing effect. Your left click, right click, you can also left click and right click on here. This also supports gestures for, you know, Windows 10, Windows 11. So zooming in and out with pinching. This actually also can use 2 and 3 finger swipe, which is how you switch from the pages and stuff. Not always dead on, but you can see how it works here. And all of the apps, they call it, are drag and drop in the software, which I'll show you right after this and how you get it set up in the software. But you do have things like settings right here, which actually lets you change where the sort of graphic is on the key. So you can see if you're looking at it, it is very slightly changing. It's just changing, you know, where the graphic is displayed. So if you want to turn it all the way to the right, and you know, you look at it from an overhead shot, like I said before, it's still gonna be blurry. This is just sort of adjusting it so it looks better from where you're seated. It could have been a cool fix, but unfortunately, that does not work. Every single one you can click on, it'll have, you know, the screen right here displaying it. You click back with the little Razer logo here. So you know you can go in, create macros and stuff on the fly, which is really cool. And if you can hear real quick, the actual keys that they used here actually are more mechanical and tactile than the actual rubber dome switches that they have on the keyboard. So these are more clicky and tactile, I'd say, than even the Elgato Stream Deck. Those are a lot more mushy than these. You can hear it. These have an actual tactility to them. There's also like one of the things you can do is have a whole browser for your media and stuff, music, videos. You can actually go in, listen all right here, watch videos on here, things like, you know, adding notes real time on the fly. This one's pretty cool. This lets you go in and it shows you like your CPU usage, RAM, network, hard drive usage. You have all these real-time stats and display, stats and usage, you know, info on display right here. You can configure it. There's a bunch of different info. Again, really cool stuff for even 10 years ago. That was definitely, you know, unheard of at the time, which is still really cool now. Definitely like this little, I guess you can call it like an app or a widget or whatever, but they have a lot of cool stuff, honestly. This little joystick sort of app lets you actually use this like a joystick in game, you know, emulating like a controller and stuff. And yes, it does all work. This mirror mode lets you mirror a screen or like one of your displays. You can have that mirrored real time on here, which would be really cool for like, you know, if you're streaming and stuff, you want to use this for like a secondary chat or whatever. This kind of just like a pointless sort of trackpad feature again, but it just brings up numbers here because you also have this little numpad section, which does bring up a full numpad. So like I said before, it's a full-size keyboard, even though you don't have the actual physical numpad and stuff like you would. You got print screen, home, delete, all that stuff. It is here in the apps. Swipe over. Some more cool things. Full browser integration here. This is an actual full browser. Default, it does bring up a Chinese store, for the Razer store, but you can go in and type in, you know, let's just go real quick, google.com, and it'll bring up, I spelled Google wrong, google.com, and it'll bring up full Google. So you have that. If I want to just, you know, type in, you got to click on it here, you can zoom in. You can see it is kind of slow and buggy, not the easiest thing. So let me just go to a new tab, you know, create new tabs. You have back, forward. Let me just try to get this going in real time so I can show you guys. Again, you can see the struggles, right? So it's a cool integration, but it's not perfect. But it is so cool that you do have a full browser right here. Okay, whatever, you get browser. You also have things like Facebook. At the time, you know, Facebook, very cool, very a well-known thing. You can go on Facebook, load up YouTube. Right now, it can't be reached. Same thing with Twitter, unsupported browser, 10 years old. Load up your Gmail if you want. But the browser feature here is really cool. There's a Spotify tie-in, a little snapshot button, which lets you take a actual screenshot of whatever's on your display. So, you know, if you're playing a game, you want to take a screenshot, boom, screenshot automatically for you. They have Photoshop and Premiere tie-ins, where it gives you some commonly used tools and stuff, which is cool to have right there, but this display doesn't do anything. So again, it would have been cool if you could have seen like your actual in Premiere window here or something, but this doesn't do anything. You have things like a gaming timer. And what's cool with this is these gaming timers are for like different like cooldowns and stuff. You can select different things like, you know, in Battlefield, the cooldowns for like when a tank's gonna spawn, a jet's gonna spawn, stuff like that. And speaking of which, they had very limited game integrations. Things like, at the time, Counter-Strike, Global Offensive, you know, CSGO, World of Warcraft, and Battlefield 3. This is kind of, you know, obviously dating itself. This just gives you, you know, just quick functions and hotkeys on the fly. So say I was, you know, engineering game, I can click that. And then up here, I have things like, you know, that's my main gun, secondary, rocket launcher. All stuff right here. Quick going, you know, kneeling, prone, very cool stuff. But again, it just was still limiting with what you can and can't do with it. And there just wasn't a lot of integration. Like I said, very limited games. And altogether, as you can see, just kind of sluggish. Like I should be going back to page 1 right now. Am I doing something wrong? Is it frozen? You get the idea. Now, I do want to give Razer props real quick with the way they support their products with drivers and software. And even back when I reviewed the Boomslang mouse a few years ago, which was their first ever mouse from like 1999, that mouse is still supported with software. And this is as well. And it's even supported in today's Synapse, which will just launch an older sort of window so you can control it all. And that's how you really would configure the actual Switchblade and the LCD screens and stuff. It's under the apps tab up top, you know, because I guess these were sort of apps you could launch. And they had a handful of their own apps that Razer built specifically for this keyboard. And there was also a little tab where you can go in and click, you know, get more apps, which was just sort of like third-party apps from game companies and such that they would collab with to put out for this. It's still not a lot at all. You can barely fill the 2 or 3 pages on here. And it's nowhere near the open source thousands of different shortcuts and functions you can use today with something like the Elgato Stream Deck, where it's literally unlimited. So bringing this all around, like I opened up with, when Elgato and Corsair merged, I thought for sure a keyboard with a Stream Deck built in was right around the corner. But here we are, 2022, and it doesn't exist yet. Now, I always knew, like in the back of my head, this keyboard existed, but when this released in 2012, I was a broke college kid. I wasn't doing like YouTube and stuff. I wasn't a YouTuber. I was mainly a console gamer back then as well. And given how cool this tech is now, back then at $250, yeah, that was still expensive. And I think just the main killer here is the fact that it's not translating to that price given the overall quality, because rubber dome switches at $250 is insane, even for 10 years ago. And that's why ultimately I think this didn't really take off. Yeah, it has some other little quirks, like I said before, with the LCD screens not being fully visible from like straight on. It's only really visible from like off to the side at an angle, but that's not what killed it. It's these keys that killed it. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if Elgato and Corsair are still working on some Stream Deck keyboard, and I wouldn't be surprised if Razer was possibly doing something like this as well. I'm not hinting at anything. I don't know anything personally. If I did, I would be breaking NDA by even making this video. But I mean, they did it back then, and they know how popular the Stream Deck is. So I wouldn't be surprised if maybe in the next year or two, we had a, newer, more modern Razer mechanical keyboard with their optical switches and some sort of a newer Switchblade tech built in. That'd be really, really cool. But again, thought it'd be fun to revisit a 10-year-old keyboard with cool modern technology with the Razer Deathstalker Ultimate. Guys, that'll wrap it up. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, let me know. Give this video a big thumbs up to show your support. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at randomfrankp. And last, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Hope you enjoyed. Have a good day.